She thought it was just a shadow in the snow, until she saw what was shivering beneath that old oak tree. What she discovered would haunt her dreams, and change 3 lives forever. But I'm warning you now, what happens next will shatter your heart into 1,000 pieces before showing you the most beautiful truth about love you've ever experienced. Stay with me until the very end, because the final revelation will change how you see loyalty, courage, and hope forever. Martha's boots crunched through the virgin snow, following the same path she'd walked for 4 decades. The winter air bit at her cheeks as she clutched her small bag of groceries, her arthritis aching with each step. At 68, these evening walks from the market had become her only routine since Harold passed 6 months ago. But today, something was different. A dark shadow beneath the old oak tree caught her eye. Not the usual pile of fallen branches or discarded trash that sometimes accumulated there. This shadow moved. Barely. A tremor so slight she almost missed it. Martha stopped dead in her tracks. What she saw next would haunt her dreams forever. A German shepherd lay curled in the snow, her massive frame wrapped protectively around 2 tiny bundles of fur. The mother's coat was matted and dirty, ice crystals clinging to her whiskers. Her breathing came in labored puffs of white vapor that hung in the freezing air like desperate prayers. But it was her eyes that stopped Martha's heart. Those amber eyes held an intelligence that cut straight through the cold. A mother's determination burning bright even as her body failed her. Even as hypothermia crept through her limbs, she refused to abandon her babies. Martha had never had children of her own. But she recognized that look instantly. Pure, unconditional love wrapped in fur and desperation. The puppies beneath Nola's protective curve were no bigger than Martha's mittened hands. Their tiny bodies pressed against their mother's warmth, seeking life in a world that had already shown them nothing but cruelty. They moved with the blind, helpless motions of newborns, completely dependent on a mother who was running out of strength to give. One puppy whimpered softly. A sound so small it should have been lost in the wind, but it hit Martha like a physical blow. Martha's grocery bag slipped from her trembling fingers, oranges rolling across the snow like scattered suns against the white canvas. She'd walked this path alone for months, drowning in her own grief and isolation. But here, in the growing darkness of a winter evening, she'd stumbled upon a family fighting for survival with nothing but each other. The mother dog's ears twitched at the sound of the fallen groceries. Her massive head lifted slightly, those intelligent eyes locking onto Martha's face. There was no aggression there. No territorial warning. Just exhaustion so profound it made Martha's chest ache. And something else. Something that made Martha take a step closer despite every instinct telling her to be cautious. Hope. This dying mother was looking at Martha with hope. "Oh, sweet girl," Martha whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "What happened to you?" The shepherd's tail gave the faintest wag. A movement so weak it barely disturbed the snow beneath it, but it spoke volumes. Even at the edge of collapse, this mother recognized kindness. She was choosing to trust a stranger because she had no choice left. Martha's hands shook as she slowly approached, not from the cold, but from the weight of what she was witnessing. This wasn't just a stray dog with puppies. This was a mother who had been abandoned, discarded, left to die with her babies in the snow. But she hadn't given up. She'd found the most sheltered spot she could and wrapped herself around her children, offering her own failing body heat as their only shield against the killing cold. The puppies stirred as Martha knelt beside them, her knees sinking into the frozen ground. Up close, she could see they were barely days old. Their eyes were still sealed shut, their tiny pink tongues visible as they searched instinctively for their mother's warmth. But there was something else. Something that made Martha's heart skip a beat. These weren't just newborn puppies struggling in the cold. There was something wrong with their eyes. Something that would change everything about their story. Martha reached slowly toward the mother dog, palm open, letting her catch her scent. The shepherd's nose twitched, processing this new presence. Then, in a gesture that nearly broke Martha's composure entirely, the exhausted mother dog pressed her muzzle into Martha's palm. She was surrendering her children to a stranger. Trusting their lives to someone she'd known for less than 5 minutes, because she understood what Martha hadn't yet realized. She was dying. The mother dog's eyes began to flutter closed, her massive head sinking back toward the snow. But even as consciousness slipped away, her body remained curved protectively around her babies. Even in collapse, her final act was love. Martha's heart hammered against her ribs as the terrible truth crystallized. This wasn't just a rescue. This was a race against time. And she was about to discover that saving these 3 lives would reveal a cruelty so heartbreaking, it would change her understanding of both human evil and animal grace forever. But first, she had to get them home. All of them. Before the winter night claimed what little life remained in this small, shattered family. The question that would haunt her through the desperate hours ahead whispered through her mind as snowflakes began to fall harder. How long had they been out here? And why would someone abandon a mother and her newborns to freeze to death in the snow? She was about to learn that some answers are too cruel to imagine. Martha's weathered hands trembled as she reached for the first puppy, and the moment her fingers touched the tiny body, her heart shattered. The puppy was ice cold. Not the normal coolness of winter air, but the bone-deep cold that meant hypothermia had already begun its deadly work. The little one's breathing was so shallow Martha had to press her ear against its chest to confirm life still flickered inside. But it was Nola's paws that made Martha gasp out loud. They were torn and bloody, the pads split open from walking on frozen ground for God only knew how long. Dark red stains dotted the snow around the oak tree, telling a story of desperation that made Martha's stomach clench with rage and heartbreak. How far had this mother walked? How many miles had she traveled on bleeding paws, carrying newborn puppies in her mouth, searching for somewhere safe to give birth? Martha's arthritis screamed in protest as she lifted the first puppy, but Nola's soft whimper of gratitude made every spike of pain worth it. The mother dog's eyes followed Martha's every movement, watching this stranger handle her most precious possession with the tender care of someone who understood what love meant. The second puppy was even colder than the first. Martha tucked both babies inside her winter coat, pressing them against her body heat while her mind raced through impossible calculations. Her house was 6 blocks away. Nola could barely lift her head, let alone walk. The temperature was dropping as darkness fell. She couldn't carry all 3 at once. But she couldn't leave any of them behind. Martha made a decision that would haunt her with its necessity. She bundled both puppies deeper into her coat and looked into Nola's amber eyes. "Stay here, Mama. I'm coming back for you. I promise." The walk home became a nightmare of doubt and desperation. Every step away from Nola felt like betrayal. Every gust of wind reminded Martha that she'd left a dying mother alone in the snow. The puppies barely moved against her chest, their breathing so faint she couldn't tell if they were slipping away in her arms. What if Nola died while she was gone? What if these babies took their last breaths before Martha could get them warm? Her front door had never seemed so far away. Martha burst through her entrance like her house was on fire, her hands already reaching for towels, blankets, anything soft and warm. She wrapped the puppies in Harold's old flannel shirts, the ones that still smelled like his cologne, and placed them near the heating vent. Then she grabbed every blanket she owned and ran back into the night. Nola hadn't moved. The shepherd's massive body lay exactly where Martha had left her, but her breathing was more labored now. Weaker. Martha could see death creeping into those intelligent eyes, and it terrified her more than her own mortality ever had. "Come on, sweet girl. We're going home." What happened next defied every expectation Martha had about animals and trust. Nola tried to stand. This dog who could barely lift her head somehow found the strength to rise on her bleeding paws because a stranger had kept her promise. She'd returned for her. In a world that had shown Nola nothing but cruelty and abandonment, Martha had proven that some humans could be trusted. The walk back was agony for both of them. Nola stumbled every few steps, her legs giving out as exhaustion overwhelmed her will to continue. Martha's own body screamed in protest as she supported the 100-pound dog, her arms burning with effort, her back threatening to give out entirely. But they made it. Martha's living room became a makeshift animal hospital within minutes. She spread blankets near the fireplace, created warm beds with heating pads, and filled shallow dishes with lukewarm water. Nola collapsed the moment she saw her babies, crawling to them with the last of her strength to resume her protective curl around their tiny bodies. That's when Martha noticed something that stopped her cold. The puppies' eyes weren't just closed because they were newborns. There was something wrong with their faces. Something that made Martha's hands shake as she reached for her phone to call the emergency veterinary clinic. Dr. Dora Smith arrived within the hour, her medical bag clutched tight as she took in the scene. Martha had known Dora for years, had brought Harold's old dog to her clinic before he passed. But she'd never seen the vet's face go pale like it did when she examined Nola and her babies. "Martha," Dora said quietly, her voice heavy with something that sounded like dread. "Where did you find them?" The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. Because Martha was about to learn that this wasn't just a case of abandonment or neglect. This was something much worse. Dora's hands moved over Nola's body with professional efficiency, but Martha could see the tension building in the vet's shoulders. Every examination revealed another horror. Old scars. Healed fractures. Signs of repeated trauma that painted a picture too cruel to imagine. But it was when Dora examined the puppies that her composure finally cracked. "Oh my God," she whispered. The smaller puppy, the one Martha would later name Hope, was barely clinging to life. Her breathing was so shallow that each breath seemed like it might be her last. But that wasn't what made Dora's voice break with emotion. It was what she discovered about their eyes. "Martha," Dora said, her voice thick with barely controlled rage, "these puppies aren't just newborns with closed eyes. They're blind. Both of them. And it's not genetic." The room fell silent except for the crackle of the fireplace and Nola's labored breathing. "What do you mean it's not genetic?" Martha asked, though part of her already knew the answer would shatter her heart completely. Dora's hands clenched into fists as she looked at the tiny, helpless creatures fighting for life on Martha's living room floor. Someone did this to them. The truth that Dora was about to reveal would transform this rescue from a story of abandonment into something far more sinister. Something that would expose a cruelty so systematic and calculated that it would change Martha's understanding of human evil forever. But first, they had to save Hope's life. Because in the next few hours, this tiny puppy would either prove that love could conquer the darkest cruelty, or become another victim of the monsters who had already destroyed so much innocence. The battle for Hope's life was about to begin. Dr. Dora Smith's hands moved with surgical precision as she examined Nola's scarred body, but Martha could see the veterinarian's professional composure cracking with each discovery. The silence in Martha's living room grew heavier as Dora's examination revealed horrors that no animal should ever endure. "Martha," Dora said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need you to understand what we are looking at here." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Dora's fingers traced along Nola's ribs, revealing old fractures that had healed wrong. Rope burns scarred her neck where a collar had been cinched too tight for too long. But it was the pattern of injuries that made Dora's voice shake with barely controlled rage. "This dog has been bred repeatedly. Look at her mammary glands, the scarring, the way her hips are misaligned from constant pregnancy. She's probably had dozens of litters." Martha's blood turned to ice. "And every time she gave birth," Dora continued, her professional mask slipping entirely, "they took her babies away and sold them. Over and over and over again, until her body couldn't produce healthy puppies anymore." The room spun around Martha as the horrific truth crystallized. Nola hadn't been abandoned because she was sick or unwanted. She'd been discarded like a broken machine because she could no longer generate profit for monsters who saw her as nothing more than a breeding tool. But that wasn't the worst part. Dora's examination of the puppies revealed something that made Martha's soul scream in anguish. The blindness wasn't a birth defect or genetic condition. It was the result of severe malnutrition during Nola's pregnancy. Her body, depleted from years of forced breeding, couldn't provide the nutrients needed for proper eye development. "Someone did this," Martha whispered, the words scraping her throat raw. "Someone looked at this beautiful mother and turned her into a slave." But Dora wasn't finished destroying Martha's faith in humanity. The smaller puppy, Hope, wasn't just weak from cold and hunger. Her tiny body showed signs of trauma that made Dora close her eyes and take a shaking breath before continuing her examination. "Martha, I think they tried to dispose of her. There are bruises around her neck that suggest someone attempted to." Dora couldn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Someone had tried to kill Hope because she was born blind and therefore worthless to them. They'd thrown away a newborn puppy like garbage, and only Nola's fierce protection had kept her baby alive. The full scope of the cruelty hit Martha like a physical blow. This wasn't just neglect or abandonment. This was systematic torture spanning years. Nola had been kept in cages, forced to breed, had her babies stolen from her, and finally thrown away to die when she couldn't produce perfect merchandise anymore. And through it all, she'd never stopped protecting her children. Martha's hands trembled as she reached toward Nola, who lay curled around her surviving babies even as her own life ebbed away. The German Shepherd's eyes met Martha's, and in that gaze, Martha saw something that broke her completely. Gratitude. Even after everything humans had done to her, Nola was grateful that someone had finally shown her kindness. Even dying in a stranger's living room, she was thankful that her babies were warm and safe. How many others were there? Martha asked through tears she couldn't control. How many puppies did they steal from her? How many mothers are still trapped in those cages? The questions hung unanswered because the answers were too terrible to contemplate. Hope's breathing became more labored as the night deepened. Martha held the tiny puppy against her chest, feeling each fragile heartbeat against her palm. This little life, born blind into a world that tried to murder her for being imperfect, was fighting with everything she had just to see another sunrise. Nola watched her baby struggling in Martha's arms, and somehow found the strength to lift her massive head. She stretched her neck toward Hope and gave her one gentle lick across her tiny forehead. A mother's blessing. A promise that she'd fought for her until the very end. That's when Martha understood the true heartbreak of this story. It wasn't that Nola and her babies had been abandoned in the snow. It was that Nola had escaped. She'd somehow broken free from her captors, probably during labor, and run as far as her bleeding paws could carry her to find somewhere safe to give birth. She'd chosen to die free rather than let her babies be born into slavery. Martha looked around her warm, safe living room and realized this was probably the first time in years that Nola had experienced kindness. The first time she'd felt the warmth of a fire or the softness of clean blankets. The first time someone had touched her without causing pain. And she was dying. Can we save her? Martha asked, though she already knew the answer from Dora's expression. Her body is shutting down, Dora said gently. Years of abuse, malnutrition, repeated pregnancies, she's been running on nothing but willpower and maternal instinct. She's been dead on her feet for days, maybe weeks, but refused to give up until she knew her babies were safe. Nola's breathing grew more shallow as dawn approached. But her eyes remained fixed on her puppies, watching over them even as consciousness slipped away. Martha had witnessed Harold's death 6 months earlier, had held his hand as he passed peacefully in their bedroom. But watching Nola die was different. Harold had lived a full life surrounded by love. Nola had known nothing but cruelty and exploitation, and she was leaving behind babies who would never see the world she'd fought so hard to give them a chance in. The injustice of it made Martha's chest burn with rage and grief. As the first rays of sunlight crept through Martha's windows, Nola took one last shuddering breath. Her amber eyes, still fixed on her babies, slowly closed for the final time. Even in death, her body remained curved protectively around hope and faith, a mother's love transcending mortality itself. Martha sobbed as she realized the crushing truth that would haunt her forever. Nola had died believing she'd saved her babies. But Martha was about to discover that the nightmare was far from over, and that saving 2 blind puppies was just the beginning of a battle against a cruelty so vast and systematic that it would consume the rest of her life. The monsters who had tortured Nola were still out there. Still breeding dogs in cages. Still stealing babies. Still throwing away lives like they meant nothing. And now, Martha knew exactly what she had to do about it. 3 weeks after Nola's death, something miraculous happened in Martha's living room. Hope opened her sightless eyes and wagged her tail for the first time. The tiny puppy who had nearly died in Martha's arms was now strong enough to stumble around on unsteady legs, her sister Faith right beside her. They moved through Martha's house like tiny explorers, bumping into furniture and each other, learning to navigate a world they would never see but were determined to conquer. Martha watched them play, her heart swelling with a joy she thought she'd lost forever when Harold passed. These blind babies, born into cruelty and abandoned to die, were teaching her something profound about resilience and the power of unconditional love. But it was what happened next that would transform their story from a simple rescue into something that touched hearts around the world. Martha couldn't stop thinking about Nola's final moments, about the other mothers still trapped in cages, about the puppies who didn't make it to rescue. The images haunted her dreams and drove her to action in ways that surprised even her closest friends. She started telling their story. First to her neighbors, then to the local newspaper, then to anyone who would listen. Martha spoke about Nola's courage, about her sacrifice, about the blind babies who were thriving despite everything the world had done to destroy them. She talked about the systematic cruelty that had created this tragedy and the desperate need for people to care. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within days, Martha's phone was ringing constantly. People wanted to help, to donate, to volunteer at local shelters. The story of Nola and her blind babies spread through their small town like wildfire, igniting something powerful in people's hearts. But the real transformation began when Martha received an unexpected visitor. Detective Mike Rodriguez from the county's Animal Cruelty Unit knocked on her door 6 weeks after Nola's death, his expression grim but determined. He'd heard Martha's story and came with news that would change everything. "We found them," he said simply. "We found the puppy mill where Nola escaped from." Martha's hands shook as Rodriguez explained how her story had provided crucial evidence that helped authorities track down the breeding operation. Nola's distinctive scars, the pattern of her injuries, the timeline of her escape had all led investigators to a nightmare facility housing over 60 dogs in conditions so horrific that seasoned officers wept at the scene. "Your Nola saved more than just her own babies," Rodriguez told Martha. "She saved every dog we pulled out of that hell." The raid made national news, but it was Martha's story of Nola's sacrifice that gave the coverage its emotional power. People didn't just see statistics about animal abuse, they saw a mother's love transcending death itself, and it moved them to action in ways that dry news reports never could. Hope and Faith, now 4 months old, had become local celebrities in the best possible way. Their story inspired 3 families to adopt special needs animals from the shelter. Their blindness, which their original captors had seen as a fatal flaw, became a testament to the beauty of imperfection and the power of adaptation. Martha watched Faith navigate the backyard using nothing but her nose and ears, chasing scents and sounds with pure joy, and realized something profound. Nola's greatest gift to her daughters wasn't protection from a cruel world. It was teaching them that love was stronger than any disability, any hardship, any attempt to diminish their worth. 6 months after that snowy night, Martha's house had become an unofficial headquarters for animal rescue efforts throughout the county. Her dining room table was covered with adoption applications, her living room hosted weekly volunteer meetings, and her phone rang constantly with calls from people inspired by Nola's story to make a difference. The statistics were staggering in the best possible way. 15 more animals had been rescued directly because people heard Hope and Faith's story and chose to act. The local shelter received a 300% increase in donations. A new law strengthening penalties for puppy mill operations passed through the state legislature with bipartisan support, nicknamed Nola's Law by the media. But the numbers only told part of the story. The real legacy lived in the quiet moments that happened every day across their community. In the elderly man who adopted a 3-legged cat because he remembered Martha saying that broken things could be beautiful. In the teenager who started volunteering at the animal shelter because Hope and Faith proved that blindness didn't mean hopelessness. In the young mother who chose rescue over buying from a pet store because she couldn't stop thinking about Nola's sacrifice. Martha often sat in her living room in the evenings, Hope and Faith curled up beside her, and marveled at how one mother dog's final act of love had created ripples that seemed to expand endlessly. Nola had died believing she'd saved only her 2 babies, but her courage had sparked a movement that was saving hundreds of animals and transforming countless human hearts. The most powerful moment came when Martha received a letter from a woman 3 states away. The woman had seen Martha's story shared online and was inspired to report a suspected puppy mill in her own neighborhood. The subsequent investigation led to the rescue of 47 dogs and the arrest of their abusers. Nola saved these dogs too, the woman wrote. Her love reached across hundreds of miles to touch lives she never knew existed. Martha folded the letter carefully and placed it in a growing box of similar stories. Letters from around the country, emails from across the globe, messages from people who had been moved by Nola's story to examine their own capacity for love and sacrifice. But perhaps the most beautiful legacy was the simplest one. Hope and Faith had learned to play fetch using their other senses, their tails wagging with pure joy as they bounded through Martha's backyard. They were happy, healthy, and completely unaware that they were supposed to be tragic figures. In their blindness, they saw more clearly than most humans ever would. They saw a world full of love, adventure, and possibility. Nola's final gift to her daughters wasn't just life. It was the unshakable knowledge that they were worthy of love exactly as they were. And now the whole world was beginning to understand that same truth, inspired by a mother's love that had proven stronger than death itself. The question that would drive Martha through the years ahead was becoming clear. How many more Nolas were out there, waiting for someone brave enough to see their worth and strong enough to fight for their freedom? The answer would define the rest of Martha's life. 1 year after that snowy night changed everything, Martha sat in her living room watching Hope and Faith chase each other around the coffee table, their joyful barks filling a house that had been silent for too long. But it was the framed photo on her mantelpiece that captured the true meaning of their story. It was the last picture ever taken of Nola, sleeping peacefully beside her babies in those final hours, her protective curve still sheltering them even as life slipped away. Martha had almost thrown the photo away because it hurt too much to look at. But now she understood why she needed to keep it. Nola's legacy wasn't her death. It was the unstoppable force of love she'd unleashed. Martha picked up a letter from the stack beside her chair, one of hundreds that arrived each week from people whose lives had been touched by their story. This one was from a retired teacher in Oregon who had adopted 3 senior dogs after watching Martha's interview online. Nola taught me that love isn't about perfection, the woman wrote. It's about seeing worth where others see waste. That simple truth had become Martha's mission statement as she transformed from a grieving widow into one of the county's most effective animal advocates. But the real transformation wasn't in what Martha accomplished, it was in what Nola's story revealed about the human capacity for compassion. The ripple effects were still spreading, 18 months later. A children's book about hope and faith was being published, with all proceeds going to special needs animal rescue. A veterinary scholarship fund named after Nola was helping train the next generation of animal advocates. 3 more puppy mills had been shut down after people heard their story and found the courage to report suspected abuse. But perhaps most importantly, the story was changing how people saw disability itself. Hope and faith had grown into confident, joyful dogs who navigated their world with such grace that visitors often forgot they were blind until someone mentioned it. They played fetch using sound and scent, learned complex tricks through touch and voice commands, and radiated a happiness so infectious that children would leave Martha's house asking their parents if they could adopt a special dog too. Martha often wondered what Nola would think if she could see how her sacrifice had blossomed into a movement that was saving hundreds of animals and transforming countless human hearts. The answer came to her every time she watched Hope and Faith play with the utter confidence that they were exactly as they were meant to be. Nola would be proud. The most powerful moment in Martha's advocacy work came during a speech she gave at the state capitol while legislators debated Nola's law. She brought hope and faith with her, and when she finished speaking about the need for stronger penalties against animal cruelty, something extraordinary happened. Hope walked directly to the podium, sat down, and looked up at the legislators with her sightless eyes. For 10 seconds, the chamber fell completely silent as dozens of lawmakers stared into the face of resilience itself. The bill passed unanimously. Martha realized that Nola's greatest gift wasn't just saving her babies from death, it was showing the world that love could transform even the most broken circumstances into something beautiful. Every time someone chose adoption over purchase, every time someone reported suspected abuse, every time someone opened their heart to an imperfect animal, Nola's love grew stronger. But the story that moved Martha most came from an unexpected source. A former puppy mill operator contacted her 6 months after his facility was shut down following Nola's law. Martha's first instinct was anger. This man might have been one of the monsters who tortured Nola. But his message stopped her cold. "I saw your story about the German Shepherd who died saving her babies," he wrote. "I kept telling myself the dogs in my facility were just animals, just products. But I couldn't get that mother's face out of my mind. I realized I had become a monster, and I turned myself in. I'm in prison now, but I wanted you to know that your Nola saved more than her own babies. She saved my soul." Martha read that letter 3 times before she understood its full meaning. Nola's love had reached even into the heart of her tormentor, proving that compassion was more powerful than any force on earth. Today, Martha's house remains a sanctuary not just for hope and faith, but for anyone who needs to remember that broken things can be beautiful. Children come to read to the blind dogs as part of their community service. Teenagers volunteer to help with rescue transports. Elderly neighbors drop by just to feel the warmth of a home filled with love and purpose. The question Martha asks everyone who visits is simple but profound. What would the world look like if we all loved with Nola's courage? Because that's what Nola's story truly teaches us. Love isn't about finding perfect circumstances or ideal conditions. Love is about choosing compassion even when the world chooses cruelty. It's about protecting the innocent even when it costs us everything. It's about believing in beauty even when surrounded by ugliness. Nola loved her babies so fiercely that she died believing she had saved them. But her love was so powerful it couldn't be contained by death. It spread like wildfire through human hearts, creating a legacy that will outlive everyone who heard her story. Hope and Faith don't know they're famous. They don't know that their mother's sacrifice inspired new laws, funded scholarships, or saved hundreds of other animals. They just know they are loved, they are safe, and they're exactly where they belong. And maybe that's the most beautiful part of Nola's legacy. Sometimes the most profound changes happen not through grand gestures, but through the simple act of loving someone exactly as they are. If Nola's story has touched your heart, share it. Let her love spread to one more person who needs to remember that even in the darkest circumstances, compassion can create miracles. Subscribe to hear more stories that prove love is stronger than any force on earth, and that sometimes saving a broken life is exactly what our own souls need. Because somewhere tonight, another Nola is protecting her babies, hoping someone will choose love over indifference. And maybe, just maybe, your compassion will be the miracle that changes everything. True love never dies. It lives on in the courage we choose, the kindness we show, and the love we leave behind. What legacy will your love create?